Total Screen proudly presents their official podcast, On Screen, with your hosts, Tyson Gifford and William Roerig.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to On Screen, the official podcast of the Total Screen. My name is Tyson.
My name is Will.
And today we are going to be following up a previous episode that we did that we called the John Wick Effect. And in that episode, we watched the first episode of John Wick, and we talked not just about John Wick, but about other movies that were influenced by John Wick and how that has affected things. So we decided to follow that up by talking about the second episode of John Wick, and then also talking about one of the movies that was heavily inspired by her, that has like a connection to it. And that is Nobody. And so we're going to be talking about both of those movies in full spoilers. Before that, we have some news stories to go over, including some trailers and some stuff about the writers' strike that you've probably been hearing about. And of course, we have some things to look forward to on the horizon. But let's kick things off with our news segment, On Beat. On Beat, as I said, is our news segment, and we're going to start talking about the actual big story of the week, and that is that the writers, WGA, has gone on strike.
Yes. If you haven't been following the news, the Writers Guild of America has been negotiating with the various media companies for better pay, for better circumstances, with regards to the landscape that we have now of, like, streaming being dominant and what that entails and what these companies have been doing for that.
Yeah, and you're going to be hearing a lot of similarities being talked about between the writer's strike that's just happening right now and a previous writer's strike that happened in 2007. This was the last big writer's strike, and that one lasted 100 days and had a pretty large effect on television at the time. It meant that late night shows like Conan and, the Tonight Show and all these other shows that were on the air, like those late night shows, basically didn't have writers. So they were doing things like Conan famously would spin his wedding ring on his desk to kill time. It literally had nothing to do. They contractually had to make episodes that they didn't have writers, and they weren't going to cross the line or something and hire scabs. So basically they grew beards in solidarity and did stupid things to pass time. And that became known as the strike season. It also affected scripted content later down the line, because you're not going to get the scripted content stuff isn't going to be affected immediately, because you're going to have a gap of time between when something is written, then filmed, then edited, then marketed, and then prepared for release. Unlike, say, Saturday Night Live or a late night show or something that has to put out stuff within a week, So a lot of the shows, I was just talking, I think I sent you a message when we were learning about the writer's strike thing, that I was watching a show on HBO called White House Plumbers, and I'm like, this is something, it just aired, so you think oh, writer's strike, it's gonna be gone. Well, of course not. They filmed this a while ago. I remember first seeing footage for the show half a year ago at least,
Well, yeah, obviously it's finished.
Yeah, they had finished filming most of it half a year ago, so it's that shows you there's a long stretch. So the stuff that's written is gonna have this 1 year kind of basic lead. Where you're gonna see things affected more is stuff like late night shows, something like Last Week Tonight with John Oliver is going to be affected by it, Saturday Night Live. I'm supportive of the WGA on this strike, as I am with the last one.
Yes.
I think writers, particularly in the industry, don't really get their fair due. They're a lot of times the hardest working people, and they don't really necessarily get what they deserve on that, especially with movies, I think even more so than with TV, because with TV, the showrunners are writers, But yeah, let's just hope this ends soon, because it is not good for television when a writer's strike goes on.
Let's hope this ends with the writers getting their fair due.
Yes.
The big sticking point is the fact that writing for streaming doesn't come with residuals like it traditionally did for broadcast and cable.
Yeah, and they'd get residuals even on things like DVD sales before.
Yes.
And that's just gutted. Like that market is an anomaly now. It doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't bring in enough to matter anymore. And,
because it used to be like every time the show was like rerun, broadcasted, or like you said, like every time like a DVD was sold, they would get residuals. And so on a streaming service, it's like the show is put up on a streaming service and then it's not rerun technically. It's just sitting there, right? So that's like that's the loophole that these media companies can use to get out of having to pay residuals. Even though, like, ideally, I think residuals should happen like every time somebody streams an episode of a show, the writer should get paid for like residual on that view. But yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, the thing that makes that tricky, like I said though, is that the former means of recouping money after the initial broadcast are gone. The ones that used to be there are pretty much gone now. Like, they just don't really exist in the same way anymore. So that's a big chunk of income that was owed to like writers and other certain positions that might be striking after this. A big part of that just doesn't exist for them anymore. So they don't get that income. So it's not like they're saying, oh, here's more money, we want some of this too. It's like, oh, here's the new way that money is being made and the old way is now gone. So we need that new money, to recoup the losses of the old money. And that's where the struggle is. That's where the problem is. But that is the WGA Writers strike. Let's hope it doesn't go 100 days like the last one. And hopefully this is resolved by our next podcast. I doubt it, but let's hope.
Yeah, let's hope for the best outcome here.
Next up, we have some trailers to talk about. We got trailers for Twisted Metal, Gran Turismo, and Dune Part 2. Dune's trailer just dropped today. Let's talk about the Twisted Metal teaser. So I don't even know how much of this is actually from the show and how much of it is just shot for the teaser. Because it kind of felt like something that was just shot for the teaser.
Yeah, it does.
The Witcher one we mentioned last week, like similar in that way,
It'd be weird if that was like actually in the show, because it was definitely shot for a teaser. It's Anthony Mackie mugging for the camera and like dancing and shit, and in a car, and then in case you were worried that this wasn't Twisted Metal, at the end it's like, oh yeah, here's Sweet Tooth. It's like, okay. It was kind of like, I don't know. I wasn't impressed, but.
So we got this, and then we got a trailer for another video game adaptation of sorts, more along the lines of the way the Tetris movie was made. But we have a trailer for Gran Turismo, and this one, it isn't really about the game. It's not about the making of the game. It's about something that really happened, though, which is there was a kind of program enacted to get some of the best Gran Turismo players to actually transition into being actual race car drivers. And this is a story about one of them. Oddly, not the first one. I've heard just recently somebody pointed out that this story, it's portraying itself like, oh, this is some geeky kid that plays video games and is really good, and now he's a professional racer, and he's actually like the second guy to do it, not the first guy.
Oh, okay. This comes off as like your typical underdog sports story, right? You get the kid going like, oh man, Dad, I gotta follow my dreams, and his dad's like, oh, you can't make a living doing that.
And there's like the scouting agent that has to deal with the big money bosses that don't understand.
Yes. And he's tough with the kid, but damn it, he sees the talent and the potential, and he's going to mold this kid into a racing superstar. There's not really anything here in the formula that we haven't seen before. It does look gorgeous. It does look well shot.
I think they should have used machinima footage from like the first game for all of the racing scenes.
They really, really focus on the game in this trailer. Like, it is called Gran Turismo. Like, so I can't fault them too much for it. But like, it's always front and center. And so, in a lot of ways, it feels like the same hackneyed underdog sports story that we've seen a million times, but also, like, it's a commercial for Gran Turismo. Yeah. So it's like that, but, like, now it's, like, mashed up with, like, a PlayStation advertisement. That's what this movie feels like. Although, it's got top shelf filmography and freaking acting. It's weird. I don't know.
We'll compare this to The Wizard.
Yeah. I do love The Wizard, even if it is blatantly like an oversized Nintendo commercial. But then again, when I watched that movie, I was like 9 years old. A Nintendo commercial was just what I wanted. So
And let's talk about the last trailer we got this week, the last big trailer that just dropped today, and that is for Dune Part 2.
Yes. It looks incredible. What else can you say? It's more Dune.
The first one looked great. The second one looks just as great, if not better. It shows the really cool scene of him learning how to tame or ride a sandworm.
It's funny because I was watching this trailer and I was like, oh my god, I forgot most of what happened in the first movie already.
Yeah, I need to go back and rewatch it before the second one comes out. But
yeah,
for sure. Unless it's no longer available on HBO Max.
Oh yeah. Probably, yeah, they'll probably be gone. It's just the mythology is so rich, but it's so dense.
Yeah. It reminds me of how beautiful the first movie was, though. It makes me really excited. Last time I saw it in theaters, I could have watched it, just on HBO Max, but I wanted to watch it in theaters. This time I might even go further and go watch it on IMAX, just because those giant sandworms and stuff, you gotta see them in full scale. But yeah, excited for Dune Part 2. And that brings us to our next segment on the horizon. On the Horizon is where we talk about what's coming up in the next week or so. And the first thing we're talking about today is Class of '09. Now, what's funny about this is there is a show currently on Amazon called Class of '07. So we basically have two Class of shows this year.
We need Class of 10.
Yeah, Class of '02. They just need just different Class of ones every year. Now, but this Class of '09 is a miniseries. It's about a group of people that went to Quantico together. That's the FBI school, basically. And they were in the graduating class of '09. But the show takes place over 3 time periods. I believe it's before, during the Quantico time, and then later on when they're agents. And it's going to have kind of connecting stories, and it's a mini-series, so it's only going to be one season. Kind of reminds me a little bit, there was a show called Quantico that was on ABC, and it was from, I think it was from the same person that does Grey's Anatomy and all those shows on ABC that now is at Netflix. It kind of I think it was from her. But it's kind of a cheesy, soapy kind of show, and this looks like it's more of a singular plot-driven story that's got kind of an espionage backdrop. But that is Class of '09 coming on Wednesday, May 10th to Hulu. Then on Thursday, May 11th, we have Ultraman finally coming to Netflix. This is the kind of CG animated Ultraman anime that Netflix showed, I think about a year ago, they first showed footage of. And that is coming on May 11th on Netflix. Then we have City of Fire. This is a story, it's a mystery that kicks off with the shooting of an NYU student in Central Park. And it's the next Apple TV Plus series, and that is coming on Friday, May 12th. Then we have Crater, also coming on Friday, May 12th, which is a coming-of-age movie set in a lunar mining colony. It's just a bunch of kids. They're in a lunar mining colony, and they decide to explore this crater. So they steal one of the rovers or something to explore this thing. And it's a coming-of-age story, and that's coming on Friday, May 12th to Disney+. The Great is returning to Hulu on Friday, May 12th as well, on Hulu as well. The Great is a great series. I love The Great. I'm excited for the 3rd season. It's a really hilarious telling of the Catherine the Great story.
Yeah.
Then we have The Mother coming on Friday, May 12th to Netflix. This is Jennifer Lopez playing an assassin who had a daughter, but kind of gave her daughter up because the daughter wouldn't be able to kind of prosper within her lifestyle. And then I guess she gets doxxed by some organization, and people are going after her daughter, so she has to save her daughter who doesn't even know her. And so that is coming on Friday, May 12th to Netflix. It's a movie. Mulligan is an animated series coming on Friday, May 12th to Netflix. It looks kind of silly. It's there's an alien apocalypse, basically. It gets thwarted by a guy named the Mulligan. He becomes the president, and then he has to rebuild America. It looks kind of just typical animated, adult comedy fare when I saw the trailer for it. The one thing that kind of interests me, though, is that this is coming from Tina Fey and Robert Carlock, who did 30 Rock and Kimmy Schmidt. So that's kind of the interesting point. Like
it's
okay,
so
how
weird
are they
because
involved in this?
yeah, how are they involved? Because it didn't feel like their brand of humor from the trailer.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It didn't land for me at all.
Yeah, the trailer didn't land for me. The names on the trailer landed for me.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, how is this gonna work out? Is this gonna, is this a bad trailer? Are we gonna get that kind of signature Tina Fey kind of style, like in the writing? Is that gonna come through at some point? I don't know. It's a weird to see their names attached to like a pretty generic looking concept, basically.
Yeah.
Next up, we have Fool's Paradise coming to theaters on Friday, May 12th. This is the Charlie Day's directorial debut. We talked about this, I think, like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah,
on the podcast when the trailer came out for it. But yeah, I mean, it looks good. Hopefully it comes out to theaters near me so I don't have to drive out of town to see it. But it looks fun. This is the one that really heavily reminded me of both Bowfinger and Trading Spaces, which were both Eddie Murphy movies. So I wonder if Charlie Day's just a big Eddie Murphy fan. He's making a movie in that style. And then lastly, we have something nobody really cares about. I think I should just cut it off the list now. It's not that big of a deal.
Everybody's already played it.
Yeah, everybody's already played it apparently, which annoys me personally. But The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom is coming on Friday, May 12th to the Nintendo Switch. Of course, I'm excited for this. Breath of the Wild is my favorite game of all time, and that I'm not like one of those fair weather people that every time a new game comes out, it's my favorite game of all time. Like my last favorite game of all time was Super Metroid before that, So that's how much of an impact Breath of the Wild had on me. I know Breath of the Wild had a huge impact on so many people. And yeah, Tears of the Kingdom. I mean, can anybody argue that any other game is like more likely to be the game of the year than this?
From where I'm standing, no.
Yeah. And there's other big games coming out, but I mean, this is Tears of the Kingdom,
Yeah, it's definitely like a 700-pound gorilla, so we'll see.
Yeah, definitely. Excited to play it. Please don't pirate the game. Just play it when it comes out on May 12th. And that is it for our On the Horizon segment, and that only leaves our final segment, full spoilers. This week on Full Spoilers, as I mentioned before, we're going to be talking about John Wick Part 2, and we're going to be talking about Nobody. This is the John Wick Effect Part 2 of our podcast. So let's start off with John Wick Part 2. So before I throw it over to you, since I'd seen this a while ago and you just saw this recently, I have to say that the thing about the John Wick movies for me is that the first one felt like very self-contained. It was this very specific story. And it was like very much personal to the character and to that moment, And then as the series has gone on, it's kind of lost touch with that because it kind of has to. I mean, you can't just keep milking the same angle the entire time. You have to kind of progress from there. But at the same time that that's happened, a lot of the stuff that made John Wick great, like the world building, but also like the stunt work and the action scenes and stuff, just keep getting pushed up with every entry in the franchise. So, but the big dividing point, like I said, is between Part 1 and Part 2. They almost feel like, it feels like a pretty significant difference between those two.
It does.
And then 3 and 4, you haven't seen those, but 3 and 4 feel very much in line with like 2, like a continuation.
So, my impression of John Wick 2 is like, it's an escalation where they bring more of the world and the world building into the main plot, into the main narrative. Where in John Wick 1, a lot of that stuff felt like more like flavoring.
Yeah, it was like on the peripheral.
Yeah, it was all on the peripheral. Now it's coming more to the forefront, to the point where by the end of the movie, it's like, like the central conflict now that we're in, the situation we're in, is like that world coming into the focus of the plot.
Yeah, the first movie felt very much like, it was just a revenge story that had all of this crazy world building on the outskirts.
Yes.
And now it's like we're diving into that world.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, and to be honest, it made John Wick 2 a much more exciting film for it, you know?
Yeah. I think I liked John Wick 1 the most all the way until 4 came out.
Oh, really?
Because, I liked 1 just felt more grounded, like it felt more tied into the real world, and everything else was kind of like this peripheral thing, and I liked that balance. And with 2, they kind of just threw that out the door, you know? It was like, okay, all that kind of like real world grounding, that's just gone, you know?
I kind of like feel the opposite, because like I kind of feel like, oh, now that the world's coming into it more, and now we're in like this kind of like surreal spy assassination world that's fascinating to me. And the fact that John Wick is like now deep into it, that is very interesting. And it goes beyond being just like a simple revenge story. There's more layers to it now.
Yeah, but to me it was just like the first one was just tighter, you know?
Yes.
And then now it's kind of diving into more stuff. Like I said, I think 4 is probably my favorite. I've only seen it once, so it's hard to really judge for sure, but I think 4 is my favorite, and that's like the culmination of everything building up to it. That is the point at which not being as tight as 1 stopped being an issue for me, because it got so good with like the stunt work and action work and the set pieces. All that stuff got so good in 4 that like everything I was missing from 1 in the other movies, like it just wasn't relevant to me anymore. It was like, okay, they've pushed so far in the other direction now that I'm not even concerned about it anymore. But I was still like with 2 and 3, I think I'm still like a little bit like, I don't know, I just kind of wish it was a little bit more tighter and a little bit more grounded until 4 hit and it went completely the opposite direction. But that's kind of how I felt about the franchise as a whole. But it's like, where were they going to go? Like, they weren't going to be able to do another story the same way they did the first one. Like, that wouldn't have worked. They had to do it this way. So it's not that I don't understand that they had to do it this way. They definitely did. And I think they did about as good as you could have done with the escalation of this franchise. And it's cool because with each entry, you know, the budget goes up, the craziness of the stunts, everything that they can get away with just goes way up with every entry. So yeah, you started to get like a real idea of that with John Wick 2, where with the first one you could tell it was kind of like a limited budget movie, you know?
Right, yeah.
And this 2, you can see it's a pretty big jump from that. You can tell the budget went up quite a bit between 1 and 2, so.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So the story for 2, we're not going to recap the whole thing, but basically what gets John back into the game is that after the events of John Wick 1, he still had to track down his car. He does that in the opening scene of the movie, basically. Tracks down his car, brings it back home. He's like, okay, now I'm done. He's got his new dog, everything's settled. He talks to his mechanic, John Leguizamo's character. They make a joke about, you know, like, oh yeah, you know, I can fix the car. It'll be ready in like 10 years or something, you know? And then it's like, okay, now I can settle down. Then that very night, he gets a visitor to his home, John does. And it's an old acquaintance named Ricardo Gamarcio. I'm probably pronouncing that very wrong. But this old contact who is, from a family that has a seat on the high table, which is like a big deal in the franchise. And he has something called a marker, I believe, which is, it's a contract between two people that cannot be ignored, basically. It's like ignoring a marker is like as bad as like doing, you know, business on continental grounds. It's like a huge deal. You can't do that, you know?
Yeah.
And you find out that the way that John was able to get clear when he had his wife in the first place, which was a plot point in the first movie about how he was able to kill so many people that he was able to set this guy's business up enough that the guy allowed him to go free. The way he was able to achieve that was by calling in a favor, and he had a marker from that. Well, now the guy was going to let John Wick go, wasn't going to bother him, but the fact that John Wick got back in the game, he said, okay, well, you're back in the game. You can't complain now. Like, I'm calling in my favor now. You can't complain. Just do it. And he wants John to kill his sister. He forces him to basically do that. John at first like tells him no, and he basically forces him, destroys his house, like basically says like, okay, everyone's going to be coming for you for the rest of your life if you don't just do this favor and get it done with. He does the favor, things go badly, he realizes it's a setup and they plan to kill him immediately afterwards, and that fails. And then it just spirals, everything spirals out of control. Because now you have the guy that was working for the guy's sister is now hunting John. He's very much like a John Wick type as well, played by Common. The character's name is Cassian. Yeah. And then you have the guy that set him up on the mission trying to kill him, and he's got his second in command as this character named Ares, played by Ruby Rose, who's like mute in the movie. Mm-hmm. And all of that's happening, everything's hitting chaos, and then we're also introduced in all of that, we're still keeping up with Winston and Charon at the Continental, but we're also introduced to the character of the Bowery King, who like basically controls the homeless population in New York, played by Lawrence Fishburne. It's our introduction to that character. What was it like seeing Lawrence Fishburne in the John Wick movies for you?
Oh, it was really cool to see him. I don't know.
Yeah, Morpheus and Neo back together.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, really awesome Matrix reunion.
Yeah, and so
we could just get Trinity in like one of these films, right?
yeah, exactly. It's the last major player we need.
Yes,
but yeah, it's so you get all this world building now of like all the rules of the high table start to come more into focus with what's going on in this movie, because John essentially assassinates somebody who was about to take a seat at the high table on the behest of somebody else who ends up taking that seat at the high table.
Yes.
And
because he's forced to.
Yeah. And that's how this story goes. And the action scenes are.
That's how things escalate. Yeah. And again, like the action scenes in this are top notch. It's like you would expect. Like, man, it'd be a really disappointing John Wick movie if the action sucked. But yeah, like there's a lot of cool action sequences. The ending sequence when he's in that Hall of Mirrors style art display is pretty cool.
When I think of John Wick 2, the thing that pops in my head more than anything, it's like a scene that's both like silly and cool at the same time. And it's where John Wick and Common's character of Cassian are both walking, and they're on different levels. Like John Wick's like on a upper level, I think. And Cassian's, maybe that's backwards.
No, Cassian's on the upper level. John Wick's on the lower level.
And they're shooting guns with silencers at each other, like as they're walking through a crowd. They're just casually sniping at each other.
Yeah, they're just like, I don't know. Yeah, it's goofy. It's funny.
It's goofy, it's funny, and it's cool all at the same time.
Yes.
That's kind of like the first thing that comes to my mind when I think of John Wick 2. And, there's a cool thing. They bring up a bit of mythology about John Wick being somebody who oftentimes has an opportunity to kill somebody and decides not to. And that comes into play twice in this movie. The first time is that we get I believe it's a scene with the Bowery King, where the Bowery King's talking about how John Wick did that to him. That John Wick came for him, and he ended up cutting him and then told him, you can heal yourself and drop this and I'm going to let you go or something, or you can try to come after me. And the Bowery King says that he owes his kingdom to that moment because he decided he would never be caught in that way again. And John Wick showed him mercy. So it's like in some ways he hates John Wick and in some ways he loves him, because he saved him. And then the same thing happens again with the character of Cassian, who John Wick stabs on like a train when they were fighting, and basically gives him a situation. He says, like, if you pull that knife out to try to follow me, you're gonna die. Or if you keep pressure on it, you can survive.
Yeah.
And this is like a character trait that we learn about with John Wick in this movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, as somebody who's just watched this, because it's been a while for me, and as somebody who has not yet seen the other John Wick movies, how do you feel about the progression of the franchise right now? Like, how do you feel about where you are at in the franchise right now?
I think this is proper. Like, this is progression. This is escalation. More of the world's coming into it. The stakes are now higher than they were in the first movie. This doesn't end on such a happy note that the first movie ended on, where John Wick wins and he just has to get his car and go home. Mm-hmm. Like, this is like John Wick is now in a situation where he has no backup and essentially, the world's going to be after him. And it's kind of like, I guess, the cliche comparison would be like, this is the Empire Strikes Back of John Wick.
Yeah, because
franchise.
it has like a cliffhanger kind of ending.
Yeah.
Or not really like a cliffhanger, but like it feels incomplete. Like it feels like the story's still progressing. Whereas at the end of one, it felt like the story ended.
Right, yeah. And it doesn't end with our protagonist winning, totally.
Yeah. Yeah, there's another step of complications and he's caught up in it, and now it's like, okay, he's on the run, he doesn't have backup, he's gonna need to do some things to try to survive, and you're gonna have to figure out what that means in the next movie.
Yes. Which I will definitely be watching.
That is John Wick Part 2. We'll do another Wick effect. We've already decided that what we're going to try to do. The problem this week is that people like David Zaslav are playing a shuffle with the John Wick franchise. With franchises in general. We made a reference to that earlier when we talked about wanting to rewatch Dune before watching Dune Part 2 and making a joke about, if Dune is still going to be on like HBO Max at that point. And the problem is that people are shuffling shit around now, like people like David Zaslav, executive at HBO Max, are moving things around, making it hard to find shit. And we'll have to see if that becomes an issue when we try to do the next John Wick Effect episode of this podcast, because what our plan was to eventually do John Wick Part 3 and then also do Violent Night, which is the Santa Claus John Wick type movie that came out.
Yes.
Because this one we're doing obviously John Wick Part 2 and Nobody. Hopefully we can still do it that way. This week ended up being a bit of a mess. We stuck to it and got through it anyways, but hopefully it's not issues again with the next one. But let's move on to our second movie, which is Nobody. And again, this is John Wick Effect is what we're talking about here. And this is a movie that came from the same writer of John Wick. The guy who created the John Wick franchise created this movie, Nobody, starring Bob Odenkirk as this kind of happy-go-lucky guy who gets pushed too far, and all of a sudden you realize, oh shit, this guy has a past. And that starts to come into play, and you get like a showdown with like a mafia-like family and all this other stuff. Very John Wick-like in that sense, but told in a pretty different way.
It says, but yeah, this is much more John Wick 1 than John Wick 2. The best way I could describe it is like, this is like blue collar John Wick. Like Bob Odenkirk plays like a more talkative blue collar character. And again, I told you before that this felt like a very different movie. This obviously felt like an imitation of John Wick in a lot of ways. Obviously, the action sequence, the idea of this pissed off guy with a past and a special set of skills. But outside of that, tonally, it feels different. I think mostly because of Bob Odenkirk's character. He is not like the silent assassin. He is like very, very talkative, has like a very different demeanor to him. Mm-hmm. Like, he's mostly mild-mannered until he gets like pissed off. It's
kind of funny as the movie progresses and you kind of learn about his character that he just he went on a hit, saw a guy with a family and said, I should try that.
Yeah, exactly.
And so he just did and just became like the most sad sack father figure character to this family that ever was. Basically just let everybody, he just completely abandoned every aspect of his previous life to the point of like just letting people walk all over him constantly and like just
yeah exactly. And it's weird because we talk about the lore and the world building in John Wick, that seems to be absent here. I guess what you said with John Wick 1 felt more like a grounded. This feels like it's more of a grounded world. This doesn't feel like something that takes place in this fantastical world of assassins or anything, or in spies.
It's like there's some of that, but we're getting mostly not that,
Yeah.
Like there is some stuff like that. Like the villain of the movie is this guy named Ultraman, and he is like in control of basically the Russian mob's money. And that's his task. He has to control it. It's a very dangerous job because if anything happens, he's dead.
Yes.
But he's this very like larger than life figure, and he's very like, I'm not fucked with. He has like all these moments where he's singing karaoke and stuff, It's very kind of like a weird, almost like a caricature weird version of the villain from the first John Wick movie.
Yeah.
Like they took that character and said, let's make him ridiculous.
But we have that. We have the Russian mafia. We have Christopher Lloyd. He has a great bit part. as like the main character's like dad, who is also like an agent.
Yeah, he was some kind of agent. I don't know if he did the same thing that
it's
Bob
not
Odenkirk's character did, but
not really clarified.
But he basically gave Bob Odenkirk's character his special set of skills that he had used, as like basically like a fixer.
It's like the two other characters come out are like his father and like I guess like his adopted brother.
Mm-hmm.
Played
That's
by
RZA's character, yeah.
RZA, yeah, RZA's character, who we mostly just hear as a voice because he's in hiding until the end of the movie when he comes out to help Hutch and David, like fight the Russians.
Yeah, I mean that was
I love like Hutch says like or something like that's a whole lot of guns. And David Christopher Lloyd says, well, you brought a whole lot of Russians.
There's a funny dynamic between the family. Like there's a lot that's not said and you just kind of understood.
It's funny because there does seem to be like more of a humorous bent to this movie than John Wick does. I guess you get that from like casting people like Christopher Lloyd and Bob Odenkirk in lead roles.
Mm-hmm. And just like the concept of somebody being too old,
Yes.
Which is a big part of this as well. Like, this isn't some slick assassin like John Wick,
No.
He doesn't get in fights where he's like clearly dominating everybody. He's basically gets his ass kicked, but he's tough enough to keep going.
Yes. You see that in like the first major fight of the movie when he gets into the fight with the Russians in the first place, which is like the inciting incident. Like technically the inciting incident is the robbery at the beginning of the movie, but that's not by the Russians. That's just a desperate couple, trying to pay for medical care for their baby, which he finds out when he tracks them down.
Because he initially just takes it. Like when everything happens, when they rob him and stuff, he just kind of takes it. He doesn't use his special set of skills for revenge on that,
because he knows that they're not professionals and that he could tell through observation that they weren't there to hurt him. But then when his daughter's bracelet or whatever goes missing.
Which is funny because it wasn't actually, they didn't take it. Right?
Yeah, they didn't take it. Like he thinks he did, and that sets off his anger, and he goes to track him down to get back. And then it's like the aftermath of that when he discovers why they did what they did, he backs off.
But then he feels unresolved. Like he's been building up this tension for so long in his life of being treated like dirt.
Yes.
And he was going to get relief in this moment. He was going to basically like destroy these people and use that as like his release of all that stress. And so now he's sitting with all that stress and he's on a bus and some drunk guys happen to cause some trouble.
These drunk Russians get on, start harassing this woman, and he sees that as his opportunity to, really release some stress.
Yeah, he's not like, I'll be the good guy and protect her. He's like, please get on this bus, please.
Yes.
He's like begging for it. He just wants to get into a fight.
Yes.
And he goes and the fight is brutal because it's not like a John Wick fight. He's not like owning them instantly.
He takes some brutal hits.
Yeah.
Like his special skill is like being able to take a punch and like bounce back.
Yeah.
They get some good hits in on him. He's not like definitely like dodging everything, but he doesn't go down either. And he does like fuck them up,
Yeah, he ends up fucking them up. One of them is so fucked up that his trachea is basically smashed and he can't breathe. And so he does that classic movie surgery of using a pen to create an air hole.
And this is what brings the Russian mafia, our main villain for the movie, into it.
Yeah. Because that character is his son, the one that had his throat opened up or something. And even though he was alive and everything, he basically took great insult of it without really realizing who he was dealing with and then created a war that, like with the first John Wick, just ends up with a lot of dead bodies.
Yeah. And like I said, there's not much in the way of the lore to this. Like, it's unclear exactly what agency he worked for back in the day. He described himself as an auditor.
Yeah.
Which is basically like, he doesn't come out and say it, but like his role was to like eliminate people off the books.
Yeah.
You know, that's what he calls being an auditor.
I think my favorite scene in this movie is when he goes to the tattoo parlor and he's like looking for like to match the tattoo to find the guys that robbed him at the beginning.
Yes.
And you know, they're all kind of like mocking him, like, oh, what are you gonna do? And stuff like that. And then one guy's approaching him kind of in that same mindset and then sees like a tattoo on his arm.
Yes.
And then just immediately says, I think he says something like, oh, thanks for your service or something. And then leaves. And locks the door.
He goes into like a room and like locks himself inside of it. And that's enough to make everybody else in like the room like realize like, oh shit. Yeah.
It's just funny because the scene didn't hit violence at all. It was just like the fear of what this guy is suddenly hitting everybody and then them just going, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Or they also had the one scene where when the Russian guy was like calling a contact to find out who this guy was. And she like sent him all the pictures and information about him. And then she just says like, oh, and I quit. And she just laughed.
Yeah. She just left. She's like, yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool. Like I said, but there's not the world building here. You know, like in John Wick, the mob was one part of it. They were all connected to the Continental and like this underground world of, again, like spies and assassins. And,
there's some of that here, but it's very vague.
Yeah, it's very vague. You don't get the sense that the mob in this film isn't operating on anything except for like their own rules.
Mm-hmm.
And there obviously is an agency that Hutch, his adopted brother, and his father work for, but we don't know what that is or any details about that.
Yeah, it's very vague. They've talked about possibly doing a second movie for this series. I hope they do, because it'd be interesting to see them kind of start to dive more into the details of that. But there isn't, like, they keep it pretty vague, which is like, you know, a little bit different than what it was. I mean, it's similar but different because you have that same kind of like man with the past kind of aspect to it. And you have, like I said, like my favorite scene where the guy sees the tattoo and locks himself away in a room, you know? You have those kind of moments. That's similar to like a character in John Wick saying, he killed 3 men with a pencil, you know, like these kind of like
like
tall
the boogeyman. Yeah.
Yeah, that aspect of it is similar. So, I hope we end up getting more of this. But that is it for Nobody and for our show. Next week, we are going to be talking about the Kingsman franchise. We're going to be talking about all 3 movies in the Kingsman franchise. Kingsman the Golden Circle, and The Kingsman, which is like a prequel movie. We're going to be talking about all 3 of those next week. So stay tuned for that. Thank you everybody for listening. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Tyson Gifford. You can follow Will. He is at Voxel Hero. You can check out our website, thetotalscreen.com. And if you go to our website and open up a container story for any of the podcasts, you can find all the relevant links to our Facebook, our YouTube, everything like that. You can follow this podcast by subscribing in your podcast client of choice, like Apple Podcast or Pocket Cast. And you can find the entire backlog of our podcast on our YouTube channel, as well as some other older content and our previous podcast as well, is all available there. So you can check that out. Thank you everybody for listening. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you for listening to the OnScreen podcast, the official podcast of The Total Screen. Visit our website at thetotalscreen.com. This podcast can be found on any major podcast client, including Pocket Cast and Apple Podcast. The entire backlog of this podcast and other content can be found on our YouTube channel.